But the men who are taking the depositions, the Warren Commission lawyers, they know what's up. So they want to know, because if there's a conspiracy, whoever placed Kennedy's vehicle on Elm Street is part of the conspiracy. So they asked the Dallas PD, and they said, well, Secret Service made that decision to make that turn. Then they narrowed down to Winston Lawson was the man who made that decision to make that turn. I forget, Cooper or one of a senator asked Winston Lawson when he appeared, and by the way, Winston Lawson of the Secret Service is the only man who appeared in front of the Warren Commission with his own attorney. And he says, why'd you make that dogleg turn off of Maine? Doesn't Maine go straight down to the Simmons Freeway? And says, well, I was told it didn't. Well, that's a bald-faced lie, because he rode it twice with Forrest Sorrells before he made that decision to make the turn. And so Winston Lawson has to be a prime suspect in the president's assassination. He put the car on that straight. But that's a parameter. You got to penetrate the Secret Service. You got to get the FBI to convict Lee Oswald of assassinating the President of the United States. That's another parameter. The only organization that can fill all these parameters is the CIA. But that's just a little bit on the Warren Report. Spent hours destroying the Warren Report just with their own documents, which was kind of fun for me to do. But then I wanted to get into why he was killed. And my conclusion is that Kennedy is at war with three groups: with the Central Intelligence Agency, with the economic elite, the super rich in our own country, and with the military. And they all have their own three specific reasons for wanting Kennedy dead. The military thinks he's a national security risk. They're kind of patriotic. They think we can get rid of one guy because 185 million are in jeopardy. The CIA, on the other hand, are merely protecting their own autonomy. They're out of control. We don't know they're out of control until 1975. The economic elite, they don't want a return to Roosevelt. And I'll go into it, show you what Kennedy's doing to the economic elite that caused them so much concern that they start pushing for the assassination themselves. So what you get is a coalition of these three groups. But just some things on the CIA that I'm sure you may not know. 1959, December, J.C. King writes a memo. He's saying, we need to assassinate Fidel Castro. If we don't, the other Latin American countries are going to imitate what Castro's done, meaning steal American businesses. And looking at history, he was right. When Kennedy takes office, those Latin American countries start nationalizing American business right and left. Brazil is an example. The president allows his brother-in-law, who's a governor, to take over an American utility company. They don't pay the Americans anything. They promise to. And what it's really about, under the guise of nationalism, is you've got these privateers who are running the governments in Latin America, and they're stealing American businesses to pocket, their own lining, I suppose. But it's not really for the Latinos. It's just for who's ever running those governments. Kennedy's asked at a press conference, what are you going to do about this? He said, well, I'm just going to go through international law. That's fine if the other side's going to obey international law, but these guys are not obeying international law. They're making their own rules. So J.C. King's right about that. But Allen Dulles approves the assassination of Fidel Castro under Eisenhower's administration. Kennedy wins the election, and in 60, and going into 61, CIA makes an unholy alliance with the Mafia to kill Castro. Mafia has a bunch of contacts on the island, they hope. Castro just kicked the Mafia out, closed all the casinos. This is all from government documents, 1975, Senate Select Committee on Governmental Operations with respect to intelligence activities. As we go into 61, Lumumba's in Africa. He's an African leader. He's captured courtesy of the CIA. CIA has already tried to assassinate Lumumba, a Congo leader. It fell through. Poison expired. They couldn't use it. So they get another CIA agent, QJ Wynn, to help him escape his UN captors and then put him right into the hands of his enemies. And you don't want to be put in the hands of the enemies if you're an African. So they took care of him right as Kennedy's taking the oath of office. Now, what I'm getting from the government documents, because the Senate wants to know what was going on in these 3 years. So they bring in Senator Smathers from Florida. Senator Smathers says in March, he's on the White House lawn. Kennedy says, what would you think if I had Castro assassinated? Smathers says, well, I don't think it's a good idea. Even if we don't do it, we're going to get blamed for it, and that's going to screw up your Alliance for Progress. Kennedy has a new plan for Latin America, sort of like FDR's good neighbor policy. His is Alliance for Progress. Kennedy doesn't say anything. Well, in April, we have the Bay of Pigs. Okay. Smathers says, is asked, well, who approached the president about assassinating Castro? And he says, well, I don't know. Well, someone did. And that someone would have to be Allen Dulles. Dulles wants to assassinate Castro prior to the invasion to enhance its chances of success. Cut off the leader's head. Now maybe you've got half a chance of in that Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy doesn't let him. Tells him not to. Dulles keeps trying anyway. We go back into about September '61. Kennedy brings, what is that man's name? I forget his name offhand. But he brings him in, he's interviewing him, and he says, what would you think if I order Castro hit? And the man says, well, I don't think you should for moral reasons. And Kennedy says, well, me and my brother, we agree with you. It's just I'm under intense pressure from the intelligence community to okay a Castro hit. This is September '61. But I'm resisting. Later on in that day, Richard Goodwin, special assistant who overheard the conversation, told the select committee that Kennedy came to him and said, that's one thing I'm never going to do. If I do that, we're all going to be targets. So Kennedy is being approached to assassinate Castro, and he's resisting. Now, he gives a speech about the same time at the University of Washington where he says, we can't adopt the same tactics of our enemies. Counterfeit mobs, assassinations, this, that, and the other. And he's really clarifying, to me anyway, that he opposes assassination. It's right after that he fires Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA. What I found interesting, that Kennedy has a girlfriend, Judith Exner. And she says that Kennedy, throughout the spring and summer, was giving her packages to give to Sam Giancana, the Chicago gangster. That then Sam would give her a package and return it to Kennedy. And that these papers were very important to Kennedy. So she's flying to Vegas, she's flying to Florida. So there's something in those packages pertaining to the assassination. It has to be because Sam is working on the assassination with the CIA. She says that in August, the last package is passed between the president and Giancana, and they never have a relationship after that. And it's the next month when Kennedy fires Allen Dulles. So my summarization is Kennedy's gathering intelligence on the CIA. He's already told them you can't assassinate people. They're doing it anyway. And what the CIA doesn't know is that Kennedy has a relationship with Giancana because his old man pressured Giancana to help him get elected in Chicago, maybe even in West Virginia. And that's what Kennedy gets involved with Giancana. And then he fires Richard Bissell in February '62, who's deputy director for plans. He also is pushing assassination. He fires General Cabal in April '62, assistant director of CIA. He's also involved in assassinations. My analysis was that these three men were not fired because of the Bay of Pigs. If you're going to fire a man because of the Bay of Pigs, fire him after the Bay of Pigs in April or May or June. You don't wait a year to fire these guys. Kennedy's firing these guys because he found out they're assassinating foreign leaders against his specific orders not to do so. He knows the agency's out of control. He makes a fatal mistake, though. He allows Richard Helms, assistant deputy director for plans, to become deputy director for plans. And it's Helms, when you look at government documents, who is running the agency from '62 on. Kennedy appoints John McCone as director, an outsider, a businessman, because he wants to gain control over these guys. But they merely cut the guy out. The pros don't let him know what's going on. How do we know that? 1975, they're asking William Harvey, top CIA agent, the select committee is, did you notify John McCone that you guys had formed your own assassination team, the executive action assassination team? No, we did not. Did you notify the director that you were trying to kill Castro? No, we did not, meaning him and Richard Helms. Richard Helms and I agreed not to inform the director that we were doing these things. Well, McCone's not really running the agency then, is he? Richard Helms is running the agency. Speaking on Richard Helms, because no one will ever speak about this guy. I don't know, he's like untouchable or feared, or I think he's just a traitor. I'd like to slap his little face. But why is it Richard Helms? If the Central Intelligence Agency is assassinating President Kennedy, then someone in the agency is directing that assassination. We know it's not McCone. Richard Helms is head of covert operations, but let's look a little bit of his character. In 1962, Bobby Kennedy finds out, because he started finally to go after Giancana, that his investigation is being blocked by the CIA. He goes to Helms and says, what the heck's going on? Helms says, well, here, why don't you talk to Lawrence Houston and Sheffield Edwards. Houston is counsel for CIA, Sheffield Edwards is an exec. And then they informed Bobby Kennedy that they're working with, they're working with Giancana to assassinate Castro. Sheffield Edwards told the select committee Bobby Kennedy was furious. He said, if you ever saw this guy, his voice gets real low, his eyes get steely, his jaw. And he says, if you ever associate with the mafia again, you will let the Attorney General know. Then he storms off and writes a memo to J. Edgar Hoover saying that the CIA was paying the mafia $150,000 to hire someone to go kill Castro. And we have that document. So what does Richard Helms do? He had Sheffield Edwards write a false memorandum backdating it, saying the CIA is terminating his relationship with Giancana, which is not true. And he goes forward anyway to assassinate Castro on his own again. That's Richard Helms. Then, of course, we have the assassination of the Diem brothers. Kennedy, he's approving the coup. Then at the last second, he changes his mind. He wires the ambassador, Lodge, saying, look, I think we ought to not do this, and I can't accept the fact that we can't stop this from happening. Lodge wires back, it's too late. Next day, the coup takes place. Kennedy thinks these guys are going to be put on a plane and flown to Paris or just flown out of the country. He's shocked when they're assassinated. That's Richard Helms again. Richard Helms becomes director of CIA in '66. What happens in '66? A couple dozen citizens start dying. They start dying in '64, in '65. It accelerates in 1966, as I noticed, when Helms becomes director. Example, William Whaley, the cab driver. He picked up Lee Oswald and told the Warren Commission Lee was calm. A little old lady tried to take the cab from him. Oswald said, here, you can have this cab. Went for the door, and the cab driver said, no, I'll call her a cab. Which is not indicative of someone who just shot the president, 10, 15 minutes ago. William Whaley, he dies in a car crash in this time period. First cab driver to ever die while on duty in Dallas. James Worrell, another witness. He thinks the shots are coming from the school book depository, and they are, because it got Kennedy in a crossfire. He runs across the street towards the Dow Tex building, right across the street from the school book depository. Pauses, he says he's out of breath because he smokes. Looks up at the back entrance to the Texas School Book Depository. Tells the Warren Commission he saw a man come bursting out the back entrance. And the Warren Commission says, well, the report we have is you told the FBI it was Lee Harvey Oswald. He said, well, I may have. And what James Worrell was seeing was not Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin. He's seeing the imposter. These guys are such geniuses, they get the imposter who already looks like Lee Oswald. They hustle him into the building at the noon hour, take him up to the 6th floor to fire. So if Lee didn't show up that day, what are you going to do, postpone the assassination? I don't think so. They're going to have the imposter go there and hopefully be identified by witnesses. These guys are geniuses at mayhem. Anyway, James Worrell dies. He dies, I don't remember the date, it was between '64 and '66. Motorcycle accident.